Recently, Whitney Webb has been at the center of thought-provoking discussions on social media, diving into complex issues surrounding power, surveillance, and systemic manipulation. Through her sharp observations, Webb exposes how fear and carefully crafted narratives are used to justify policies that reshape freedoms. Let's break down her tweets from January 2nd and 3rd and explore the key points she's making. Nothing makes Americans willing surrender their remaining freedoms and civil liberties to the fused blob of Silicon Valley and the national security state, the public-private partnership that actually runs the U.S., like extreme anxiety and fear. Webb starts by highlighting how fear is weaponized to make people relinquish their freedoms to a blend of corporate and government power, a partnership she sees as the real authority in the U.S. Some of the same prominent people who rightly have been pointing out that the FBI and CIA are deeply corrupt, which they obviously are now saying we should believe those agencies about the motives and identities of those behind the recent attacks, and also believe FBI, CIA people that the U.S. is now infiltrated and invested with al-Qaeda operatives, poised to bring chaos to the U.S. in 2025. Even more odd, some of these people used to rant for hours about how al-Qaeda and ISIS were creations of the U.S. government, either directly or indirectly. Funny how narrative management works. Al-Qaeda is definitely a U.S. creation, and fear over current and/or future attacks will be used to market a complete techno-tyranny takeover. You'll be told that digital ID, digital surveillance money, and Palantir big data pre-crime algos are the only ways to stop the terror attacks, and it will be disturbing to see how many fall for the ruse. Don't give in to the fear and don't consent. Digital ID and many of these technologies will only stick if you voluntarily comply and adopt them. Webb critiques the inconsistency of trusting historically corrupt agencies to define modern threats. She warns that fear will be used to push invasive technologies like digital IDs and surveillance. Just a suspicion, but I have a feeling the alleged use of Airbnb and the Turo app by the alleged terrorists will be used to force an insane amount of KYC and probably biometrics on anyone who wants to use those or similar apps in the future, particularly if similar behavior occurs in any future attack. Here, Webb predicts that terrorist incidents could be exploited to justify stricter regulations on platforms like Airbnb, using them as a gateway for intrusive biometric requirements. Now that the people who fear-mongered about Russians infiltrating and being to blame for everything are leaving power, now we have people on the other side fear-mongering about Islamists infiltrating and being to blame for everything. Oh, how the pendulum swings and how the security state always wins. Webb points out the cyclical use of scapegoats in politics, whether Russians or Islamists, to keep the security state in control regardless of the party in power. The CIA must get involved now, before it is too late. A call to have the CIA involved in domestic policing from the guy who is supposedly being constantly targeted by the CIA, all because of an alleged terror threat based on groups created and arguably still managed by the CIA, al-Qaeda, and ISIS. Checks out. 2025 is shaping up to be the year of Make Palantir, a CIA front company, great again. With sarcasm, Webb critiques the logic of calling on the CIA to address threats allegedly created or influenced by the agency itself. She also draws attention to Palantir's role in such narratives, kind of telling that Israel significantly ups its Hasbro budget for 2025, usually focused on Americans and Europeans, and now attacks from terror groups that never attack Israel, despite being radical Islamists, and have provable CIA Mossad ties, have unleashed a convenient wave of media slop that echoes that which preceded the Iraq War, and which also, conveniently for Israel, conflates Palestinians with ISIS. Webb examines how propaganda budgets and media narratives conveniently align with geopolitical goals, likening the current climate to the prelude to the Iraq War. Are Bitcoiners now embracing Michael Milken's CIA and mob-backed Wall Street criminality, or low-key trying to smoke signal that Michael Saylor is a grifter? Hard to tell anymore. If your shtick for years was debt-based monetary system is evil, and thus we need Bitcoin, how can you possibly idolize the junk bond debt barons at Drexel? Webb questions the contradictions in Bitcoin advocates supporting figures like Milken, who represents the financial systems they've long criticized. Any comment on how King Charles and Trump's nominee for Treasury Secretary, the ex-Soros guy, are super close friends? Webb uses this tweet to subtly highlight questionable connections between prominent figures in global politics and finance, suggesting hidden alliances. The cheerleading for expanding private prisons and biometrics among the so-called dissident right on this site is unnerving. If you think this expansion of the police state is just going to be for illegal immigrants, You've ignored the last 40-plus years of American history. Webb critiques the support for policies that expand surveillance and prison systems, warning that such measures often extend far beyond their initial targets. Please remember the history of last 25 years and recognize this for it is repackaged neocon slop brought to you by former spooks to get you to surrender your remaining freedoms in the name of fighting the war on domestic terror, with consent manufactured via an American Gladio-style op using the same CIA boogeymen as 2001 to 2003. Webb reflects on how familiar tactics from the early 2000s are being recycled to justify new security measures, urging readers to resist falling into the same traps. Through these tweets, Whitney Webb connects the dots between fear-based narratives, invasive technologies, and broader political agendas. Her commentary challenges readers to critically assess the narratives presented to them and recognize patterns of manipulation used to erode freedoms.